As President Putin and General Sisi met on Thursday to discuss future relations, let's take a look at what Western commentators have said about the meeting and the implication for Egyptian foreign relations. An analysis piece on the Eurasia Review has the title "The Futures of Egypt, the Good, the Bad and the Ugly." Political analyst Haizam Amirah-Fernández says Egypt has undergone bloody repression and unprecedented levels of polarisation in the last few years since the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak. He says an optimistic outcome would be that Egypt can achieve a considerable degree of democratisation within 3 to 5 years. But he adds the armed forces should refrain from submitting a military candidate for the upcoming presidential elections scheduled for the first half of 2014 and should focus instead on their task of defending and protecting the country's territory. He says civilian actors such as the National Salvation Front, which is now at a low ebb, and the Tamarrud campaign should fill part of the void that would be left by the gradual withdrawal of the armed forces and the weakening of the Muslim Brotherhood. He writes that a less favourable outcome would be a faulty democratisation combined with endemic instability. In the event of military rule imposing itself, security conditions would face enormous difficulties and there would be a return to the logic and practices of the police state that was responsible, among other factors, for Mubarak's overthrow. Meanwhile, the New York Times says Putin encourages Egyptians' presidential ambitions following the meeting on Thursday between Field Marshal Sisi and the Russian president. The article, which refers to Sisi as a universally acknowledged but unannounced presidential candidate, says Sisi's stated purpose was to negotiate a deal for Egypt to buy Russian weapons with money donated by the Persian Gulf sponsors of the new military-backed government, reportedly as much as $2 billion. This would send a clear message to the US, he adds. The Obama administration has said it will resume full shipments when Egypt takes steps towards democracy. And in the meantime, Egypt is eager to show the US that it has alternative allies if Washington proves too difficult. Welcome back to Press Review Roundup, where we discuss the week's biggest stories in the Middle East. Carl, we've covered quite a few countries this week: Egypt, Tunisia. What stands out to you as the biggest story this week that you've covered?
Just like what you said, I discussed Tunisia, especially throughout the Washington Post article that looked at Tunisia as a role model for democracy in the Arab world and the first ever state in the Arab world to draft a constitution that observes equality, gender equality above all, and minority rights. It did establish Tunisia as a Muslim state, but it was also a state with very Celtic, secular elements to it. And then we spoke to Dr. Dina Rizk of Warwick University, who spoke about the right path to follow in Egypt, a safe path basically, and that was based on an article from Al Monitor. And it was by Alfred Raouf, who saw that the militarization of the state would not really be the safest path. It might provide stability, but it might not be the safest on the long run. And he did advise General Sisi not to go for president and maybe stay as a defense minister. Now, Dr. Rizk argues that there's another school of thought in political theory that says that the military, having a military rule, does not necessarily mean that we will be achieving stability. And we have seen this in Egypt. She further warned that the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, when under pressure by the military, it might radicalize. So that was quite a controversial point there, but it does make sense, especially like she said at the lower levels, at the lower lines of the Muslim Brotherhood, not at the leadership lines, who she said that they would not fall into this trap of being radicalized by military pressure. But she said that it might happen that the lower ranks of the Muslim Brotherhood, people who feel isolated by the system or marginalized, they might opt to cooperate with other radical or terrorist factions in Egypt to try and oppose any possible military rule.
Well, I mean, earlier this week I spoke to Nirvana Mahmood, a journalist and commentator, and she seemed to have a different perspective to what your guest said. She believes that nothing's really changed in Egypt. It's a continuation of the military regime. In fact, it's probably only got worse. We were discussing the ongoing Twitter campaign, Free Al Jazeera Staff, regarding the Al Jazeera journalists who've been detained in Egypt without charge.
It's really a major issue now when it comes to human rights and the rights of expression through the media and journalists. So there's something needs to be done about that, certainly in Egypt.
Do you think, from what your guest said, do you get the feeling that maybe some commentators think things are changing in Egypt?
They are changing a little bit. They are changing in the sense that the structure is changing, but then again, people are worried that the old guard of President Hosni Mubarak will come back to power through the guard of General Sisi. So it will be the same, there are fears that it will be the same corporatist state that it used to be under Mubarak. So that was the main argument in the discussion and in the article that we observed in yesterday, actually, in Al Monitor. I think it is worthwhile to wait and see what will happen really in Egypt.
Yeah, the other thing I covered earlier today was the seeming rapprochement between Egypt and Russia. You know, both Sisi and Putin talking about developing stronger ties. And the article I covered in the New York Times seemed to interpret this as Egypt saying that it doesn't need the US as an ally. It's focusing more on developing ties with Russia.
Very big shift there, and I think it's very important, particularly when it comes to delegitimizing the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. So obviously, if you see President Putin with Sisi, that's a big sign there that they are not for the Muslim Brotherhood or for any possible Islamic rule in Egypt. So if this happens and if this takes place, the alliance with Syria might become stronger when it comes to Egypt's rule under Sisi. So then President Assad will be in a very much better position. So I can see somehow, but then we can't speculate, that Egypt and Russia and Syria might form a very strong alliance the way it's going.
Point. Yes. I've even heard some perspectives saying that the military has used the Brotherhood as the second party, and that they are actually in some way behind the Brotherhood in Egypt because it posits an opposite to them, and it makes them look better in comparison.
It does.
Do you think that's
it does. It's a two-way bridge, really. Even the Muslim Brotherhood, they sort of need the military rule to justify their existence and their opposition. Yet at the same time, the military rule under Sisi is in also they really need the Muslim Brotherhood to justify the fact that they are controlling any sort of instability that might be caused by the acts of the Muslim Brotherhood factions that were associated with terrorism in the country.
It's a strange dichotomy, and it looks set to continue in Egypt.
It is so.
And we also covered Geneva 2. We spoke to Nidal Naisseh, Syrian analyst, who doesn't feel like any solution is being reached in the second round of talks in Geneva 2. What do you think about that?
It's a bit difficult now in Syria, the situation, the both ends don't really seem to be wanting to compromise, and that's what we could see when we read between the lines, of course. And none of the sides is gaining big momentum there. We just have to wait and see, I think, until...
Both sides claim to want a political solution, but it seems that the reality on the ground is that they want to...
The opposition has made it very clear that they want the Syrian regime out first, and then they could tackle issues such as terrorism. Now, today, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, along with his counterpart from Germany, they discussed, obviously, Ukraine, and they also discussed this issue about Syria. And Lavrov he criticized harshly the opposition and its Western allies for putting the change of regime as a top priority, while terrorism should be tackled first.
when the opposition has said change of regime, some people have said just that Bashar al-Assad step down and someone else come and take his place and all the institutions remain.
Yes.
Others have said no, overthrow the whole regime. Which do you think they're aiming for now in Geneva too?
As a compromise, I could see Mr. Assad, if he decides to compromise, he might step down, but the whole system will be a Alawite majority ruling the country. A change of person basically, but he would still have power. But I'm not sure this is where we're going. We'll just have to wait and see.
Sure. Well,
so, on that note, let's see you again Monday for another press review in depth, and don't forget to follow us on levant.tv for more details. Bye for now. Thank you very much for watching.